Hey, Sens fans, welcome to Season 4, Episode 18 of the Senstennial Podcast, a member of the Hockey Podcast Network. And this week, we're excited to welcome back one of our longtime recurring guests, Graeme Nichols. So, Graeme, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Lads, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate coming back.
Yeah, no problem. And for those that don't know, Graeme currently writes about Sens in his blog, Roman a Day, and we'll include a link to that in the description of this episode. So I guess I'll get things kicked off here. And of course, the news of the past almost week now has been about Pierre Dorion going out into the trade market and acquiring the star defenseman from the Arizona Coyotes, Jakob Chychrun. So right off the top, what do you think about the addition of Chychrun to the lineup, his fit with the team, and really just fitting in with the age group and the core that Ottawa has right now?
Yeah, I think we were all kind of waiting for the shoe to drop, right? As soon as Nikita Zaitsev got traded, you're like, okay, they're shuffling the deck, they're clearing cash for somebody, and that's whenever it comes to like this team and adding defensemen, you're always waiting for the shoe to drop, and you're kind of worried about who's coming in because historically this organization's had a really tough time identifying proper targets to get, and the guys that they brought in have just been ineffective as hell, and they've paid quite a bit of money and quite a bit in terms of opportunity cost to get some of these guys into the fold, and it's just never worked out. So, in a vacuum, you're like, okay, the Zaitsev trade, they gave up a lot to get that money off the books, and you're kind of nervous and you're worried about it. And then they go ahead and bring in Jake Chychrun, and it's just, like I was on another podcast earlier in the week, and the message that sentiment that I gave was, this is probably the best top four that Ottawa's had since 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to slight the group that went to the Cup final in 07, but like Chris Phillips and Volchenkov, they were lauded as the shutdown pair. But I mean, like that's probably a good second pairing on most teams, and that wasn't the best Senators pairing that they've ever had. But they got a lot of play because of how far the team went and stuff. But like, I think you really have to go back to like 05, 06, when you had Redden and Scherer in the fold anchoring the top two pairs. I think like that's you're almost going back 20 years. It's taken them almost 20 years to fix the blue line, and it's taken a long time. And I think the organization deserves some credit for finally going out and getting a guy who can play in the top four. I mean, it's not, there is some risk involved, right? You're adding a third left shot defenseman to the mix. And despite the early going where it's looked like Chychrun eventually is going to be able to play and play at a high level in that capacity, so far it looks pretty good. So I mean, like some of those concerns are alleviated somewhat, but I mean, it's always a risk, right? You never know how it's going to shake out eventually. And yeah, it's exciting. You finally have a top four that can bolster things and hopefully keep the back end moving, because I think where this team's gotten in trouble in the past is that the depth on the blue line and the quality of the blue liners just hasn't been there, and it's affected their play. And I think it impacts the forwards in terms of these guys spend a lot of their time defending in their own end when they don't have to, because the blue liners simply can't move the puck effectively to the forwards and start transitioning that puck from defense to offense quickly enough. And I think adding Chychrun into the mix, good defensive player, fast, can move the puck, big shot. He hits a lot of check boxes, local ties. Seems like he's a high character guy. And then you hit his contract, which is a sweetheart deal for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty much you talk about escalating salaries where you're going to have to look at a bridge deal for Pinto, possibly look at re-signing DeBrincat. Like the savings that you get on Chychrun are huge for the next 2 years. Obviously, they're going to be under pressure to re-sign the guy once the next two seasons are over, but that's a problem for down the road. And in the interim, you mentioned it off the hop. Like this is a guy who's turning 25 at the end of the month on March 31st. And that age is just, it fits seamlessly with the group of young players that they built in Ottawa. And he seems like just a genuinely likable guy just through his interviews. And I know it's just like, it's the early goings and whatever, but just the first impressions of this guy are fantastic. And he looks like he genuinely cares, and looks like he's genuinely overwhelmed to be in Ottawa and get out of Arizona and everything else. And I think, it feels like they're kind of building an environment that players want to be a part of and come to and enjoy and embrace. And you hope that kind of rubs off and leads to an Alex DeBrincat extension down the road too. So I like what they did. It is a heavy price to pay, but I think they covered their asses pretty well, just in terms of the conditions associated with the trade. You're talking about a first round pick that's lottery protected, 2 second round picks. like Pierre Dorion, there's no guarantees that he's going to be around once new ownership comes into the fold. So, I mean, he probably doesn't really care about the futures attached to it. He brought in a quality player, gives him a chance to play this year. It's just, I think it's a nice move. It's a great move. And you can't really hand wring too much about it. I don't think it's like a Matt Duchene trade where it's like the team's bad and you paid a huge asset price to get a guy. I don't think, although they did pay a big price to get Chychrun, I think they covered themselves well. I think the team's good enough where they don't have to worry too much about the draft picks associated with the cost.
And I mean, if we look in retrospect at the price we paid for Duchene, the Chychrun price is nothing compared to that. And
Knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood, obviously. But the immediate reaction I had, other than complete euphoria with Matt on our live stream, was the thought that there's not a chance this guy doesn't sign with Ottawa long term. I mean, his grandpa is a season ticket holder. Like, it's not gonna happen at this point, and it for all intents and purposes, it seems like the way Dorion sent this message, it was like, we are creating a team for the future, even for the now. But we have DeBrincat, and this deal sort of like solidifies the fact that we are serious. So maybe that looks like DeBrincat, taking a little less money to stay on a team that is really good for a long period of time. Chychrun probably does the exact same thing, because like they're the bones of a Stanley Cup contender are right there. That was my thought process.
Yeah, and I know everybody's like kind of wringing their hands over like DeBrincat, what he could cost, because his RFA qualifying offer has to be 9 million on this offseason. I mean, like, worst case scenario is DeBrincat accepts his qualifying offer 9 million and he leaves as a free agent. I think that's a worst case scenario. But I think if he winds up accepting his qualifying offer, they'll probably wind up trading him anyways. But in saying that, just because the qualifying offer is 9.0 million, doesn't mean that's the cost that the extension would take to re-sign him, right?
Yeah.
I think if you can, like you said, if you can convince these guys that this is a place where you want to be long term, and there's lots of desirable aspects to it. I think DeBrincat's a pretty low key guy. He's got a young family. There's a lot of things that check boxes, I think, for him, and just having a young core. That's you got Stützle, you got Tkachuk, you got Batherson, you got Chabot. You have Chychrun now. Like, there's a lot of young guys that you can meld with and build with, high character guys that are just fun to be around. And I think to convince these guys to stay, it shouldn't theoretically be that hard, and I think hopefully if you can sell them on the fact that, hey, DeBrincat, you're due for this qualifying offer, but you're not at the level of a Tkachuk or Stützle, even though you have the contract leverage to negotiate maybe a higher salary. Maybe it's like, hey, you know what? You're also having a bad year, so maybe that'll help lower your contract demands. And if you really want to be here, put your money where your mouth is and sign for this. And
I also have to say that it's funny that it's considered like a bad season when he has 20 goals, which, hey, is good for any player. I mean, he had 41, and then he dipped to 18, 41. Now he's down to 20. I'm sure he'll end up with at least 25 on the season. And I think without Josh Norris being in the lineup, that's an obvious hole at center. And if he was in the lineup, I think then that really, you could be talking a few more goals on DeBrincat's resume this season.
Oh, for sure. And I think if you look at just power play allotment in the first little bit, right? Like, he was on the second unit for the start of the season. You talk about their struggles at 5-on-5 to score goals. I think part of that's driven by the performance of the defenseman. If you stabilize that second pair and you get Travis Hamonic off of it, I think there's a lot more opportunity for 5-on-5 just offense and just the ability to create, right? So hopefully that plays into it. But I mean, guys have down seasons as well. Like, DeBrincat had a bad year like 3 years ago, and then responded with 40 goal years. So people who say, oh, I don't think he's what Ottawa needed. It's like, well, you've only watched him for 50 games now. Like, just like pump the brakes a little bit and relax. Like, you can't expect like linear progression with players all the time. Like there's so many variables that go in play. Like you don't know if he's dealing with an injury, he's on a new team, he's trying to figure things out, learn a new system, everything else. Like there are a bunch of variables that can contribute to a down season offensively. And I think it's really too early to like start worrying about what he is, because if this is him at his worst, like what is he at his best? And and he's had about a bunch of bad luck, like lots of grade A chances that wind up missing the head or hitting a post, or the goaltender made a big save. Like it happens. Like hockey's very luck dependent, but people don't want to admit that a lot of the time. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And listen, we have one more retrospective question for you about the trade line past before we jump into what the Sens prospects are for down the stretch. And you'll see people say sometimes that GM Chris Drury for the New York Rangers has the easiest job in the league. It's, hey, do you want to come to New York? Yeah? Okay, cool. Bye. Click. That's the soft power of being in an attractive city like New York. Do you think that the Sens are entering a new era of soft power in terms of their ability to acquire and extend and, retain their talent? Because I think for a long time, Senators fans dreaded when a player's contract would come up, or they knew that free agent signings were just not in the books, trading for the big fish, usually not in the books. I feel like now with the vibes that we're getting out of this locker room, Chychrun saying in his interview that he's got everyone in the team reaching out to him in order to offer him a place to stay while he's getting settled. You have leaders in the room like Giroux and Brassard who are respected around the league, not just, by Ottawa fans. Do you think that all of this greater picture has helped us make the moves that we're starting to make? And do you think it's going to be an asset to this team going forward?
I think we're getting close to that point. I don't know if we're necessarily there just because new ownership isn't in place, right? Like I think if we're looking at being a good desirable spot, like one of the things I wish that happened at the deadline was the team acquired a short-term third line center. That's like, but they're limited by their budget. They still have millions to play in cap room. You see the Nikita Zaitsev deal was made to free up money to get Chychrun. Ideally in a vacuum, you're able to like hold on to Zaitsev and just bury him till the offseason when you can cut that money and spend lesser opportunity cost to get rid of him. But in terms of just being desirable, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's lots of popular guys. Like I think Brady Tkachuk is an infectious player in the good sense that people want to be around a guy like that. Like he's kind of a unique character and he's just such positive vibes around him. I think you look at Tim Stützle, who's locked up long term. I think you look at Shabbat, Chychrun, just young quality assets. Jake Sanderson being another. They built a good group of guys. I think it's just a matter of like how well can you build around those guys? And I think that's been one of the struggles, unfortunately, for this team for a while, is identifying the right veterans to put into place to surround these guys. And that's just kind of been one of the shortcomings of the last few years. It's just they have good pieces of play. It's just the veterans they seem to target and acquire just aren't good enough. But Jake Chychrun, he is a veteran. He's only 24. He's turning 25. You think he's been in the league for a while, but still a young guy. But he was a great guy to target and acquire. And hopefully that's the trend moving forward, especially as we go into new ownership. And if speaking of ownership, if Ryan Reynolds somehow is involved with this team going forward, I think that's a huge draw for a lot of people, especially you start talking about the marketability. Everybody talks about Wrexham and the program there that you can watch on Amazon. And it's just like, if they do something similar with Ottawa, I think it's going to be a factor. It has to be, right? And I think that's what everybody's hoping for. But even if he's not, new ownership, the Breton Flats, talented young team, I think there's a lot of positive things happening around this team in the city, and it's exciting to be a part of. And for fans who've endured a lot of hardships over the last 10 years, 5, 6, 7 years, it's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, and those positive developments that you've mentioned have, for the most part, over the last week or two, been carried over onto the team's on-ice performance, with the notable exception of a pretty miserable loss to Chicago last night. The Sens have had a quite good run of games. Do you feel that playoffs are now a reasonable expectation for this team, or should the metric that we're measuring them by still be playing meaningful games going into the stretch?
You mean like playoffs for this season, playoffs for next season, or
for this season? Yeah.
I still think playoffs for this season are that could be an expectation. I like maybe it doesn't have to be the most realistic ones. I think like the odds are still long that they get in just because there's a lot of teams fighting for those spots. Everybody's pretty close right now, but they do have games in hand on the Islanders who are playing Buffalo tonight. Pittsburgh's down right now. Last I checked, 4-0 to Columbus in the second period. So I mean, like there's opportunity to gain ground and to make some noise. It's just a matter of going out and doing it. And yeah, like last night's result against Chicago, 5-0 loss was a little bit devastating because you see a team at the bottom of the standings that you hope to make a push for. But I mean, like Ottawa's been in that spoiler role before towards the end of the season where they, you know, they're just a bunch of young guys playing for jobs next year and playing for bigger roles and they have nothing to lose. So they're playing pretty loose. And whether Ottawa took them lightly, I don't know. I know Brady Tkachuk said that in his availability after the game last night, but Ottawa's not talented enough to take anyone lightly, right? They're not there yet, unfortunately. So sometimes you need awakenings, and like losing games is going to happen down the stretch. Like inevitably, you're going to drop some games. Losing one to Chicago, especially if Ottawa misses the playoffs, but like a point or two is going to hurt. But I mean, it can also serve as a wake up call too, where you can actually like rally the troops, tighten up. The games are only going to get harder in March. I think their schedule for the last 2/3 of the month are just devastating in terms of the quality of opponents that they're facing. So it's going to be a hard uphill battle. But there's a lot of measuring stick games in there as well, right? And if you come out hard against the Pittsburghs, Tampa's, Toronto's, Colorado, I think is in the mix there too. And there's a few others that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but like that, it's just meaningful games against quality opponents. And if you can elevate your games against those teams and give them push and steal some points, I think it bodes well for the future. And you're putting the team in a position where they have to get points against quality opponents. And I think that's all you can hope for, especially with the start and the way that this team played in November. And like if they miss the playoffs, we're going to be looking back at that bad start again, like we do every year, and say, oh man, if we didn't start that bad in November. But I think this one will ring true a little bit more because they are close, right? They are really, really close to that wild card spot. So regardless of not whether the fact they make it, I think like the development for the young kids is huge. I think Tim Stützle's taken another step. You can go down the list. I think it sucks to lose a year of this young core's prime to miss the playoffs again, but I think they've made some inroads there, and I think they've addressed some personnel issues, especially on the blue line with the Chychrun ads. So even if they miss this year, I think, you know, you focus this offseason on adding the right guys to supplement these guys. And if you supplement the depth with quality players on efficient contracts, which should be the goal, this team's in a real good spot coming next season.
Yeah, definitely, Graeme. And thanks for that. And before we get to the next couple questions we got for you, we're just going to take a quick little ad break and then we'll be right back.
What's up, NBA fans? It's time to bring the hoops action to the palm of your hand with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. This week, new customers can bet $5 and win $200 in free bets instantly. Plus, for a limited time, all new and existing customers can get a no-sweat same-game parlay every day. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app today, opt in, and place a same-game parlay on any NBA game. And if it doesn't hit, you'll get a free bet back. I love the Raptors. Ride or die for them. Would not bet on them this year. So bet against them, make some money, makes your life a little easier. Download the app now and sign up with the code THPN. New customers can bet $5 on the NBA and get $200 in free bets instantly. Only at the DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA, with code THPN. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void in Ohio. See show notes for details. And we're back. Graeme, once again, thanks so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure. You are entrenched in Senators lore on Sens Twitter, and I'm sure all of us have been.
You make me feel old, man.
Well, Sens Twitter only got good in the last 5 or so years, anyways. So we're good. Right from the hop. Once Craig Anderson left, it felt like we've been sort of searching for an identity in net, and this year has been no different at all. Do you have any concerns with Ottawa's goaltending down the stretch? With Forsberg being out for the season, Talbot consistently going down with minor injuries, and then Sogard and Mando being rookies.
Uh, they're out of the playoffs. So I think like this recent stretch of games where they won 5 in a row. I mean, like the kids played a large part in that, right? Like Sogard played really well. He was a rookie of the month for February. Do I have concerns about it? I mean, in the sense that it could implode. I could be concerned about the fact that like 2 young goalies are playing crucial games, and if they struggle a little bit, it could wind up hanging on them if Ottawa misses the playoffs a little bit. I mean, like those are developmental concerns that you have to have. But I mean, like these are also 2 young kids who should have a chance to play meaningful hockey games at the NHL level. And I think there's also a lot of value in that, regardless of the outcome of games. I mean, you look at what Minnesota's doing, and you look at the success that Philip Gustafson's having there, and you kind of wonder, hey, would he have had the same level of success here? I don't know if he would have. But I mean, that's something you can talk about for another day. You could argue that and debate that till you're blue in the face. But like long term, I think Sogard was the guy. I think that's why they moved on from Gustafson in the first place. I think like they reached a decision on him where they felt more comfortable going with 2 veteran options than a guy who had a good 10-game stretch 2 years ago. And was it the right decision? I don't know. Maybe holding on to Gustafson frees up more money so they don't have to trade Zaitsev like they did. But I mean, like that's all kind of like revisionist history. If they were worried about saving more money, they could have gone a route like that. But I mean, that's hockey. And this organization's never really, to me at least, they've never really felt comfortable going with younger alternatives, right? Whether it was like Ray Emery, Robert Lehner. Did I call him Robert Lehner? Robin Lehner.
Almost.
Like Robin Lehner, they just moved on from at an early age. Ben Bishop, right? Like they kept Craig Anderson. They wanted the veteran options, and that's kind of continued here over the last little bit. So whether those guys get a lot of rope past this season, I don't know. It's a good question. Cam Talbot's an unrestricted free agent. I don't know if they'll bring him back. He's been okay. I don't think he's been that particularly strong or great or anything to that measure. But I mean, the goaltending market this offseason isn't particularly great either. So it's hard. It's hard to project what they'll do. And I mean, they traded a bunch of draft capital now to procure some really good talents in DeBrincat and Chychrun. So you're kind of hamstrung in terms of what you want to give up in terms of assets to get a guy, because I don't know if guys like desirable assets in Belleville. I don't think a guy like Lassie Thompson or Jacob Bernard-Docker or Igor Sokolov, I don't think guys like who are on the cusp potentially, or maybe they're prospects, I don't know if those guys carry enough value to go get a guy that you really want. So
yeah,
I don't know what the long-term solution here is, other than hoping that a guy develops internally and turns into a guy that you can run with for like a year or 2 or 3 years until you actually decide what you want to do developmentally. Maybe they go out and draft a goalie this year, or maybe they do that next year. I don't know. It remains to be seen how they're going to handle it. And kind of rolling the dice. But I mean, goaltending is such a volatile position, right? Like one year Gustafson looks great, the next year he looks terrible, and then this year he's the best. He's got the best save percentage since the new year, right? So it's crazy.
The old adage is goalies are voodoo, and I think everybody agrees with that. And to add on to your point, it's the question is whether Forsberg comes back fully healthy ever. One knee injury like that is a lot on a goalie, but 2 simultaneously, that's really tough. And
he's not doing surgery either, right? So it's kind of,
luckily, like there's with that type of injury, I do know that you can go the surgical route, but it is mostly agreed upon that no surgery is the best route. Just from anecdotal evidence with other goalies, but it's we don't want another Josh Norris situation here. So you make some great points, because we need to start developing goalies. And I will consistently die on the hill that it was an unforced error to draft Tyler Boucher when Jesper Wallstedt was just sitting there. And once again, revisionist history, so to speak. But
I don't think that's revisionist history at all. I like to go off the board as much as they did, it doesn't even have to be a goaltender, right? Like you can talk about this organization's depth. I think you've seen it a lot this year where it's like you complain about like the third line not scoring enough, or there not being enough talent on the fourth line consistently. I think like you could never have enough talent. And I think to shy away from talent in the first round with a top 10 pick, to draft a guy because you're worried about future concerns about payroll and having too much skill, I think that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, that feels like they galaxy brained the pick and they wanted like, there's a lot of value in finding like the Tom Wilsons of the world, right? Like there's a lot of value in having great big players who can play physical and contribute offensively. And then like maybe Boucher gets there eventually. I don't want to crap on a prospect's worth before we can really determine what he is or what he'll be. But in saying that, I mean, you pass up on the best goaltending prospect who's, the Athletic gave the Minnesota Wild the best farm system in the league, and that's your number one prospect on that. And you had him at your fingertips, and you could have had him, and you passed on that. But in saying that, they did have Gustafson in their system at the time. They had Sogard, they had Marilyn, and they have a bunch of depth in the system, and they probably thought, hey, goalies are voodoo, and this guy won't necessarily pan out. Like the goaltending rate of attrition for first round prospects isn't great either, right? Yeah. So I mean, just to play devil's advocate, I know, would they have been better taking him? Maybe. It certainly would placate some long-term concerns about the position, but I mean, they also could have drafted a really skilled forward, and then maybe we'd still be having the same conversations about what they, hey, maybe we should have drafted the goalie instead of another skilled guy. But that's the nature of hockey, and that's what makes it fun. It's a good debate, and it's healthy, and I don't think it's revisionist at all to talk about stuff like that.
And to make one final comment on that before we go to our next topic, we had an episode that we'd recorded with a scout who lived in Sweden and would take in games. And sadly, the audio was corrupted, so we didn't end up posting it. But he said that the year that Wallstedt was drafted, he said he had been the best goalie he'd scouted to come out of the SHL since Henrik Lundqvist. And so for me, I was like, damn, that is some high praise. And for a guy who watches a lot of Swedish hockey, that says something to me. And so I thought hands down when he was available at number 10, especially when they had just lost Decord to the Seattle Kraken, or were expected to. I can't remember. No, the draft followed the expansion draft. Right. So yeah, when they had just lost Decord, like getting a top 10, using a top 10 pick on one of the really highly touted goalie prospects wouldn't have been a far-fetched decision to make. And I would have been all for it. But like you said, there's many scenarios that it could have taken place. They could have taken forward, still needed to look for a goalie now. It's neither here nor there, but I thought that was an interesting comment that was at least said to us from a scout over in Sweden. But to get to our last point here, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier with question number 2, but getting your take, do you think that the season could still be considered a success even if the Sens miss the playoffs?
I think so. I don't know if it's enough to save Pierre Dorion's job. And that's going to be one of the most intriguing storylines to follow, I think, down the stretch and in the new ownership and in the offseason. Did he do enough? And is the season successful? I think for the young players, I think most of them have developed well. And I think when you talk about future success for this franchise, it all kind of hinges on the play and development of the players. Like if you guys have had hiccups, like Drake Batherson's been terrible defensively this season. Thomas Chabot's had some poor defensive hiccups over the last little bit, but I think like to a person, most of the young players on this team have taken good steps forward, and I think that's one of the most positive things that you can say about this group. I think Jake Sanderson's been everything you could have asked for and more. I wish the organization would move him off a pairing with Hamonic as soon as possible, but that's just a small gripe, and that's just player management, but that'll happen eventually anyways, right? Like Hamonic's a free agent. Hopefully they don't re-sign him. I think they can, that's one of the easiest positions to upgrade on the roster right away. And I'm not trying to belittle the guy or rip on him or anything, but I think like if this organization is serious about taking the next few steps forward, I think that's the easiest way to do it. And then goaltending, we mentioned goaltending. You have to address more of those long-term concerns, I think, next year. Whether it's rolling with Sogard and Forsberg, like I think Forsberg's health is a bit of a wild card. You don't know what you're going to get next season. It never really felt this season like they were comfortable rolling with him as the 1A option, right? To me, it always felt, I don't know how you guys feel, but to me, it always felt like Talbot has been like the de facto guy for this group. And the results are kind of, they're okay, but they're not great. And it's going to be interesting. But I think Brady's had a great year. Stützle's had a great year. I think they have like 4 guys who could crack 30 goals, or 4 or 5 guys who could crack 30 goals if everything broke right for them. Mm-hmm. It sucks that I wish Claude Giroux could stay young forever.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, you know, like he's at an age where he's still effective as hell. And, you know, if we're talking about long-term concerns about this payroll and stuff, I think he's another guy who will probably remain in the fold and take less money to play here, kind of like Alfredson did in the latter years of his career, right? So it's just there's so many good storylines about this group. I think it would be disappointing if they missed the postseason. You know, like adding Chychrun was huge. I think the Brinkat was a great add. The Norris storyline sucks. I wish he was healthy this year. And there's a bunch of what ifs, and I wish you could have addressed this sooner and filled in some of the gaps a little bit sooner to give them a better shot during the formative stages of the season. But as a whole, I'm not really disappointed with it, but I am intrigued. Like the biggest thing for me is like, I'm intrigued to see what happens when this team sells, because I have no idea what DJ Smith's future is. I have no idea what Dorion's future is. But it's funny. It's like, you know, just watching like the public opinions in the realm of like this team and this organization. It's like everybody rips on DJ Smith and like Dorion throughout the course of the year. And it's like they hit the deadline and, you know, they have a 5-game winning streak and everyone's like, oh, these guys like Jack Adams votes.
Oh yeah.
And like Dorion's like, oh, amazing. It's like, well, you just gave up a bunch of future assets to bring in a guy. I mean, if you trade first round, second round picks, like you're going to get good players.
Graeme, are you suggesting that sports fans are fickle? That doesn't sound right.
No, not at all. It's recency bias in the greatest thing.
Yeah. I was seeing a lot of people mentioning that Hamonic back as a 7th D next year would be good. And I get it in terms of like the vibes, if you will, but I think that the Sens need to move on from defensemen who are losing a step. We saw that against Chicago. He just couldn't stay with his man on that zone entry, and that led to a goal, unfortunately. And I think that, you know, they have JBD, they have Thompson in the minors, and you can bring one of those guys up. They're still very cheap. So you're not having to put too much money towards your cap. It's not taking up a roster spot that wouldn't already be taken up. They're in your system. Just plug them in. JBD's shown that at times he can handle 18 minutes a night. So putting him on, you know, say sheltered minutes of, you know, 10, 12 minutes a night playing with, let's say, Brandstrom, I think is kind of a good course of action for next season, rather than signing some aging vets who are losing a step, which is going to be detrimental to the team going forward.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, you look at JBD's underlying numbers since he's been with Ottawa, and like this year is like statistically he's played at a worse level than Zaitsev. And you know, like I'm all for like giving kids an opportunity to play and stuff, and like he'll probably get better at some stage of his career. But I mean, he's not that young. I think he turns 23 this year. What is he? Like if he's a bottom 6 guy, maybe he has more value to the Senators as a trade asset. And same with Lassie Thompson, same with like Sokolov. If the organization's not sure of these guys, then start flipping them for more quality talent that you can actually put more trust in and play. Because I think that's one of the things. I think like adding Chychrun in the mix only adds to that, right? You've solidified the top 4 for the next like 3 seasons. Or two at least in the case of Chychrun, but like everybody else is signed past that point, or you'll have control over. Jake Sanderson's the other one that they'll have to re-sign to another contract. But the top 4 is solidified. I mean, you can find inexpensive guys to play on your third pairing who can give you good results, and you see them all over the league. New Jersey's done a really good job at targeting those guys and finding those guys, and it's just a matter of unearthing them. And I think that's where the organization's kind of struggled in the past. It's like they just target the wrong guys to add into the mix for their depth roles. And I think if new ownership comes in, I hope that's if they wind up getting new management or new scouts or an analytics department, thank God, just to help vet some of the decision makings and target guys who can play efficiently at an inexpensive cost. That's the way to go, and that's how you supplement this young roster.
And
so
they may learn that, you know, one of those guys that could be signed for long term at a very cheap cost happens to be playing on their third pairing and was their best defenseman yesterday. The franchise. You heard it here, folks. This guy should be here to stay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining us, Graeme. Thanks for your insight. Really appreciate it. Always enjoy talking some Sens hockey with you. I know I plugged your blog at the beginning of the episode, but aside from that, is there anything on the horizon that's new and exciting?
Ooh, new and exciting. No, not really. Not really. Nothing. No, just enjoying the games down the stretch and just happy to contribute to social media. The Sens sphere of the internet, the little corner of the internet. And just, no, it's fun. It's everybody's fired up. It's a cool time to be partaking in social media and just the Senators online sphere. It's just the vibes seem to be positive. I know they lost yesterday, but it's cool just seeing like, there's a bunch of people like that's the fun part. There's like a bunch of people who got turned off during the Dorion years, in the latter stages of that, and then you're starting to see them like kind of re-enter the fray and re-engage with the community and stuff, and it's cool to see. And then you've got like young upstarts like yourselves who are podcasting and doing some awesome stuff, and it's good. It's just it's cool that the fan base is kind of growing, and there's so many different routes and avenues for people to get Sens content. It's fucking awesome to see because it's come a long way from where it was when I started. So.
Yeah, definitely. So it's cool too to have like a not to, toot your horn, but it's cool to have like a Sens Twitter OG joining us on a podcast that we just started a few years ago. So thank you again for joining us. And yeah, exciting times down the stretch. And let's hope the Sens can sneak in and do some damage.
Absolutely. Matt, and Bennett, thank you so much for having me on. Anytime you guys need me, I'm around. So just fire me a message.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Graeme. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for watching. You can find us on social media. We'll plug it in the description. We'll put Graham's in there too. And have a good night. Go Sens, go. And hopefully some more wins coming up this week.